Welcome to the Green Room. I'm Jacob Yarrow, Executive Director of the Green Music Center, and I'm here in my office at the Green Music Center on the campus of Sonoma State University. We created the Green Room in 2020 to be our online series while the pandemic prevented in-person performances, and we are continuing it in 2021 to offer some insight into the work of artists who will be performing here in coming months. In this episode, we talk with the four members of Invoke, a fascinating band from Austin, Texas. They are a string quartet with a couple of twists that has been described as not classical, but not classical. They're a multi-instrumental band encompassing traditions from across the United States, including bluegrass, Appalachian fiddle tunes, jazz, minimalism, and Western classical music. They weave all of these styles together to create truly individual music written by and for the group. I'd like to thank Cartograph Wines for their support of Invoke's concert on Friday, October 29th at 7:30 p.m. in the Weill Hall loft. And a big thanks to you for supporting the Green and joining us in the Green Room. The following interview consists of excerpts from a longer program that we recorded last year. We look forward to seeing you and Invoke at the Green Music Center on October 29th. Invoke, welcome to the Green Room. So glad to have you here. Wish you could be here in person, be here performing right exactly where I'm sitting, like you'd be standing here playing to the crowd. But we're thrilled you've agreed to join us here in the internet, and we look forward to welcoming you to the Green next fall when we hopefully can all be together in person. So we've just listened to a recent performance that you made of your tune Dogs. It's a great introduction to your music. And now let's meet all of you. Go around the screen, hear from everybody, learn about your influences and how Invoke got its start. So Zach, how about if we start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Zach Madison. I play violin, as you just saw. I also do a little bit of singing and anything else that the quartet needs me to do. I'm originally from, around a couple different places, but mostly from Montana, Kalispell, Montana. If there's anybody out there from Montana, shout out. And I moved to Maryland to go to the University of Maryland in College Park, which is where I met the rest of the guys. And I'll turn it over to Carl.
That's awesome. I didn't know you were University of Maryland, folks. That's great. My daughter goes to school there.
Go Terps.
Hey,
Terp situation. Sorry, I interrupted you, Carl. Go ahead. Who are you?
No, it's great. We're always meeting Terps. It's pretty funny. So I'm Carl Mitzi. I play the viola and the mandolin, and I sing as well. Do a little bit of arranging and songwriting for the group. Let's see. I guess I was an Army brat, so I moved all over. I was born in Arizona. Haven't been back since I was 3. Lived in South Korea, Ohio, Massachusetts, Florida. Then went to school in Georgia, and then I met these fine gentlemen at the University of Maryland, where I went for my master's degree. And now eventually we all ended up here in Austin, Texas, through various life circumstances.
All right. And who's up next?
That would be me, I think. I'm Jeff. I hold down the bass of the group, but only sonically. Sometimes I get a little crazy, but we're not going to talk about that. I'm kidding. I play cello. I'm Jeff Mannion. I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, which means I did not have very far to go to the university up the street, so to speak. So that was nice, and I just happened to meet these fine gents in the School of Music there. 7 years ago now? It feels like the each year is just kind of shot by, and
this year doesn't count.
This year,
it's all 2020.
This year's a little bit different, but yeah, I always loved classical music, but I also enjoyed kind of the idea of sticking out and doing something different in some way. And this group was, as you all just heard, very welcoming to that kind of mindset. And we all kind of happened to have similar kind of thoughts on like, well, there's so many classical musicians in the world and universities are churning them out. How can we differentiate ourselves? So very happy to have found y'all three and have made something out of it.
No doubt. And up next we have...
Hi, I'm Nick, and I play violin and banjo, which I played both of in Dogs, as I remember. And I also do a little bit of singing with the group and writing and arranging and all that sort of fun stuff. I grew up in Washington, D.C. mostly, traveled around a little bit. Kind of like Carl, my dad was in the Navy for a bit, so I spent a little time in Italy and just kind of running all over the place. But yeah, grew up in D.C., and so going to Maryland was kind of like my hometown almost. And influence-wise, definitely grew up playing tons of different folk music and jazz and things like that. I had a little jazz band in high school and carried that through to college. So I think
You're
all
not
of
going to
those
talk
things
about the
have-
other the
Oh,
other big influence?
well, I used to have hair, and when I did, I had a hair metal band, and I sang for them and ran around on stage like an animal. So that was my alter ego, so to speak.
They did let him sing when he shaved it off, though. I was there to see that. So
It was a good reunion show.
That's amazing. It's great. Nothing like introducing yourself with like 3 other people who know you way too well, right? It's great. Well, thanks, Nick. And Nick has an awesome strobe thing going on because his setup doesn't talk great with our setup, but I think it talks well enough. We can hear you, we can see you. It keeps it exciting. It's really great. When you all met at the University of Maryland, was it like, how quickly were you like, oh, we're making a band? Or did you make a string quartet? And did you play old school string quartet stuff? Or how did that work out? How'd you get together?
Yeah, so Nick and I were in the same studio and we'd been playing together some, and Carl was a new arrival, and same with Jeff. Jeff was a freshman. Carl was a recent master's student. I think Nick and Carl were playing some together, but the thing that brought us all together as a group was that we were playing in a music festival in Italy, in Siena, Italy. And we went there for 5 to 6 weeks over the summer of 2013. And we knew that all of us were going, and we were like, oh, that's a string quartet formation. So let's bring some string quartet repertoire to play for like chamber parties. And we also had a pianist friend, and we brought the Peter Shickley's second piano quintet to learn with him while we were over there. And that was a lot of fun putting that together. It's super Americana sounding, some Brahms influence, but lots. If you know Peter Shickley, who also is PDQ Bach, his more serious repertoire is very folk inspired. And so when we got back to the States, we played a concert with Thomas, the pianist, and got a great review about how the strings looked really tight and had a lot of energy. So I gathered us in the Starbucks next to what used to be Ratsy's, but is now a chicken joint instead of a pizza joint.
Good chicken joint.
In College R.I.P. Ratsy's, though. Yeah.
And we decided that we were going to be a string quartet and mostly focus on new American music, because we fell in love with Peter Shickley's works, but the Kronos Quartet was coming to town that fall, and they were playing Philip Glass's 6-string quartets. We're like, let's learn the 5th, and maybe we can like finagle coaching out of David Harrington or something like that, which never happened, but it was that kind of beginning which led us to what we're doing now. I would say, being at the University of Maryland, we all a lot of our training did involve very traditional string quartet repertoire with all of our coaches there, but very quickly we moved to within the year or early next year in 2014, Carl and Nick had applied for a competition that was innovation, like an innovative chamber music competition. And our innovation was that we were going to put on a concert of all original works by the quartet, and we were going to include mandolin and banjo kind of as like in the fine print. And we got runners up in that competition, I think a lot because we actually had that mandolin and banjo in the fine print. And part of the runners up is that we had to go to South Carolina, where the competition was, and play a 20-minute set. But bear in mind that when Carl and Nick applied, none of the music had been written, and they had lied that it all was. So we had to kind of figure it out along the way. But I think when we got down there and we played the tunes with banjo and mandolin, we got another review saying this is the future of classical music, which maybe is, but I think was more of a kind of a push for us to keep going in that direction.
Though I will also add that we aren't only influenced by our reviews. We did actually have fun both of those times, even though it was a little stressful.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm only here for the reviews, Jeff. So that's fueled by the prestige.
It wasn't a prestigious setup. We had to, and when we were in South Carolina, we were sleeping in a tent, a large 4-person tent
we couldn't,
for the whole week.
We couldn't afford the hotels we wanted, so we literally camped because it was like 15 minutes away, right? We just drove in. Everyone thought, I mean, for adult men, right? Like, I guess we were just out of college, so we, a little different, but
making it work, committed to what you're up to. I love the origin stories and the College Park, University of Maryland lore. That's all wonderful. We just listened to their performance of Strum by Jesse Montgomery, an example of a wide variety of music that they play by living composers, not just themselves, who are all 4 living composers. But how do you build repertoire and work with composers? How do you figure all that out? What are your goals? What are you trying to do?
That's a really good question, because I think that kind of relates back to us being a string quartet, but also including the banjo and mandolin. It really lends itself well to writing original music, but one of the very hard things about it at the very beginning was whenever we would try to work with composers, and we were young, some of the composers weren't really sure if we would continue on performing. So it's kind of a big risk to include things like mandolin and banjo and singing. And how do you write for what is essentially like a barbershop quartet, but also a string quartet at the same time? So, but after a couple of years, and we were at the University of Texas now, we kind of established ourselves. We had the opportunity to play a concert for the new music concert series called Southern Exposure at the University of South Carolina, ran by Michael Harley. And one of the stipulations about coming to play was that we would include more edgy music, and which is kind of hard for us to define, but he was wanting to push us in the direction of starting to commission new works. And I think because we'd established ourselves, plus we had this kind of institution backing us when we started to approach composers about this possibility, it added some like credence to it. And we were like, we really want to do it this way, include the banjo and mandolin and things like that. And so we commissioned 4 new works, and by Takuma Ito, Steve Snowden, Ian Dickey, and David Kirkland Garner for the first run. And we also wanted a way to tie them all together, to just not just make them 4 random pieces, but have a running theme. So we kind of came up with the prompt: pick a place and time in American history that is important to you, and maybe the location where you're at in this moment, and make the pieces around 10 to 15 minutes. And so that way, later down the line, we can actually ask more composers to write American postcards, and we can fit them in and mix and match depending where we are and what kind of story we're trying to tell for that evening. And so that's really worked for us, and tying it together. And the first one was so successful, I think it really showed that it was possible to write for this multi-instrumental band. And since then, we've had a lot of success with it.
Before we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask one obvious question that I haven't gotten to. So where did you all start to play so many different instruments? Where did the multiple instruments come from? What's the lineage of that practice for you?
Well, I can start with that one. So when my origins are as a singer-songwriter at the age of 13, of course. So prior to my violin training. But I actually played the mandolin first. A neighbor had one, and he invited me over. So I learned how to play like Celtic tunes, sort of in the living rooms of people's houses, that kind of stuff by ear. And then eventually my mom, who was an organist, I want to say lightly forced my brother and I to play the violin. So we were Suzuki kids. I was taller than all the other kids, and I hated it. I was so old when I started. So I switched to viola soon after that, and I didn't play the mandolin again until Invoke. So I took all of my years off in college for the viola, 4 years, and another 2 for my master's, off from the mandolin. And then when Invoke came around, they were like, "Hey, do you still play that?" And I was like, Yeah, I think so. So
Try to figure that out. That's great.
yeah,
And Nick, how did you come to the banjo?
But I actually didn't start banjo until after we had started the group. And as we mentioned earlier, you know, we fabricated an application for a music festival in which basically I played the banjo. So we had been discussing it. My mom used to play some Irish style tenor banjo. So, and you know, conveniently enough, the tenor banjo is tuned in fifths, just like, you know, violin, viola, cello. So the tuning translated pretty naturally. I had played a little bit of guitar here and there in, you know, growing up. So I had a little bit of picking dexterity. But from there, we you know, on the application, we decided, you know, we had already written Souls in the Mud.
We were in too deep, though.
Yeah,
we were just in too
had
deep.
a
We were
very
like, wait.
prominent. We had already decided it had a very prominent banjo part. So then we had to write it, and then I had to learn the part. So that's basically how that started. And you know, we all have an interest in bluegrass and American folk music of all varieties, and it was just natural to add those instruments, and to, you know, we eventually started singing as well, and it was just natural to add all of those in to help, you know, roll those influences into everything that we were doing.
I will point out, Zach and Jeff actually have played just the odd other instrument here and there, and they've been like extremely flexible. I think Zach played pump organ on one show and sang was it a Tom Waits song, I think?
Yeah.
And
Zach played, let's see if I can point to it, that thing right
there.
there.
It is, yeah. So they're also pulling all the stops out when we need them to on these other weird instruments.
I love it. Well, someone who grew up in Appalachia going to fiddle and banjo contest and then went on to degrees in Western classical music. I love how you're combining it all up and making it like part of you and making your own music with it. It's really, really wonderful. I appreciate that.